My my wife would call him thrifty, but my mother always called my dad stingy. Even though he bought me all these Christmas presents and this and that. So anyway, the bus was probably $2 or $3 cheaper than the train. So instead of going on the train to Detroit, which I love, I had to take the Greyhound bus to Detroit. So I got on the bus in Orlando and sat 4 seats from the rear. That was the battle line I had drawn. And I was determined that I was going to fight it to the end, to death, defending that. And I wasn't going to move. Again, everybody behind me was black. When we got to Winter Park, this black girl got on. She was a teenager. I was 12, so she was probably 15 or 16, something like that. And she was going to Detroit too. And so when she got on, we started chatting, and I said, look, I said, the bus driver might tell us to move back, but if he tells us to move, don't move. I said, we have a right to sit here. I said, the law says that when you're traveling in interstate commerce, you cannot be segregated. So she said, okay. So everything was cool. The bus rolled on out of Winter Park, and we got to Jacksonville. The bus driver got off, and then he came back on the bus and came back to us and said, would y'all please move back to the back? We got some white people getting on. I remember he was a younger guy. Obviously, he didn't have the attitude of this other driver. And so I just gently pressed down on her arm or thigh so she wouldn't move, as a reminder. And I looked up at him and I said, sir, we have a right to sit here. I said, we are traveling in interstate commerce. And the law says that we can sit anywhere we want to. Pam, I was scared. We were in Jacksonville. You just mentioned Jacksonville. Jacksonville was like being in Mississippi. He said, well, I got these white people getting on. Would y'all please move? And I just said, no. So he turned around and left. And that's when I was really scared. Because this was right the year after Emmett Till had been lynched. And, all those warnings my grandmother had taught me about talking back and being up at it to white people. And I didn't know whether they were going to come back on the bus and kill us. And finally, he came back on the bus, and these white people were trailing him. And he led them to the back of the bus behind us, and they sat down. And I felt a combination of relief, felt vindicated, but I also felt afraid because I didn't know what was going to happen for the rest of the trip through the South, which was all segregated. But that taught me, after that trip was over, that I could stand up for my rights and survive. So that probably instilled in me that seed of rebellion against the system that really blossomed later in the 60s when I was in high school.